fade. But using the wrong printer cartridge could mean snaps fade in months, warned the magazine. Flawed. They have said the scheme is deeply flawed and a waste of money. Hall. It's like going to a concert hall, except that you are virtually there. Evolve. I think the private sector will evolve incredibly fast, Mr. Hadi says. Abide. Russia had indicated it would in any case not abide by the rulings of the U.S. courts. Defensive. England's defensive crisis grows. Dry. O'Sullivan keeps his powder dry. Inclusion. Gadgets needed moving parts and/or electronics to warrant inclusion. Occupy. We are hoping to occupy the space in between, he added. Confusion. Confusion over high-definition TV. Hell. Hell no. Advertise. 1 in 10 users have bought products advertised in junk mail. Focused. These may be too focused on 1 or 2 product lines. Eligible. All children born after September 1, 2002 will be eligible. Instant. There would be no instant sweeping changes to blog lines, said Mr. Lanzone. Q. Nobody queues for music anymore. Amendment. No discussion or amendment is allowed. Lion. Umaga ready for lions. Cartoon. South American themed cartoon Jocko. Cruise. In other words, if you do want a cruise, your options are limited. Obsess. I am obsessed with online role-playing games. Prince. As before, you control the super-athletic prince from a third-person perspective. Brave. Thousands braved the cold weather to see the stars in London's Leicester Square. Bundle. They were separated and bundled off stage before returning to end the set. Curfew. Mr. Was was also given a curfew and told to surrender his passport. Convention. It claimed both filmmakers tossed Hollywood convention out the window. Forever. They were to change Lee's life, and the comics industry. Forever. Imagination. But this time we did not play well and we lacked imagination. Contemporary. What are the contemporary issue in nurses? Interval. United ended the game as a contest just 2 minutes after the interval. Thoroughly. We have thoroughly tested the candidates. Funeral. Angel's favorite funeral song. Nationality. The survey also looked at issues of nationality. Their task is made much harder by the huge number of landmines dotted around the country. Passage. The proposed law had a troubled passage through the European Parliament. Evolution. Spore will allow players to experiment with the evolution of digital creatures. Sheer. The most striking thing about many of the pieces was their sheer size. Immense. But he knows Wales will put his technique under immense scrutiny. Hype. Could Half-Life 2 possibly live up to the hype? Literally. The former literally helped change the world by vastly improving navigation at sea. Tolerance. We are going to have zero tolerance in questions of racism. Offender. Where an offender is convicted of murder, the court must pass a life sentence. Tyranny. Terror powers expose tyranny. Loyal. If nothing else, it will develop a vast and loyal community. Summary. Mr. Blair said the statement was a fair summary of Lord Goldsmith's opinion. Casual. Casual gaming to take off. Infected. The plight of the infected women was overshadowed for a long time. Frustrating. It's very frustrating. Wrist. Open Chief Paul McNamee had said, Kim's wrist obviously isn't going to be rehabilitated. Compress. So if you have anything that allows more space, you don't have to compress so hard. Encouraging. But I found the Hindi film industry very warm and encouraging. Rig. Labour trio had vote Rig Factory. Assurance. Shuninu wants assurances that he will return to O'Neill's first team plans. Offshore. Qantas considers offshore option. Foundation. It is a disgrace. There is no foundation to this, he said. Mad. I'm mad. I felt I was in there with a shot. Criterion. He said a residency criteria would end at a stroke this fundamental iniquity. Contrary. Then they can go out and prove a point to the contrary. Circle. Instead, roads are being clogged by drivers circling in search of a cheaper outdoor option. Amplify. Traders said that thin trading levels had amplified Monday's move. Magic. All black magic. New Zealand rugby. Psychological. Ms. Joel said the legislation would ban psychological trickery. Tremor. Anti-tremor mouse stops PC shakes. Unpaid. Mothers can currently take up to 6 months paid leave and 6 unpaid. Generous. As a friend, he was very kind and generous. Steer. Oscars steer clear of controversy. Deposit. WMC's interests in uranium deposits were a contributing factor, Mr. Vaile said. Deem. The striker protested his innocence and referee Mike Riley deemed the collision accidental. Inevitable. To some extent, increases in these areas are inevitable. Bribe. The manager told the company to disguise an invoice for the bribe as consulting fees. Mess. She is not messing us around. Misuse. Sadly, the 2004 Olympics did not escape the problems of drugs misuse. Governor. This estimate is preliminary, Bank Governor Sunil Mendes told reporters, and could rise in 2006. Indicator. The ODPM data is a fairly lagging indicator. Aid. MPs quiz aides over royal income. Concentration. The real problem is the concentration camp conditions in Guantanamo. Tricky. It's a tricky match, Federer said. Vendor. U.S. Attorney David Kelly said he expects the 9 vendors will plead guilty to the charges. Addiction. Manipulated nicotine levels to increase addiction. Tunnel. Edu describes tunnel fracas. Woo. Deutsche Börse set to woo LSE. Injection. UK broadband gets speed injection. Versus. Dollar hits new low versus euro. Coast. Referee Andy Turner waved play on and Casey Lalala coasted in for his side's 5th try. Distract. Nothing distracts you when you were playing. Bump. Overbooking can often lead to bumping when a passenger is moved to a later flight. Honorary. Honorary consuls will be appointed in some of the areas affected by the embassy closures. Compression. That's a huge amount of compression that has to be applied, about 98%. Infringe. Civil rights were infringed as little as humanly possible. Nickname. The Academy officially adopted the nickname in 1939. Empire. Argonaut founder rebuilds empire. Financially. Financially it could set him up for life. Excitement. Her life was one of great excitement. Submission. The legal submission described Spears as one of the most recognized performers in her industry. Midnight. The currency officially to be known as the new lira will be launched at midnight on January 1st. Indefinitely. Most of the men are being indefinitely held in Belmarsh Prison, South London. Fortunate. Brian and Seamus are in the equally fortunate position. Presentation. It will do so at a presentation in New York on January 26. Protocol. The protocol establishing the zones has been stalled for years. Sponsorship. And they have sponsorship, courtesy of the Polish distributor of Nintendo products. Revenge. Desai backs Blues revenge trip. Biography. Second favorite is a biography of Mary Queen of Scots, by John Guy. Arena. But all is not simple and straightforward in the mobile TV arena. Girlfriend. Rock star sued by ex-girlfriend. Legendary. Legendary music studio to close. Gay. Brett Locke of gay group outrage. Microphone. I have a little microphone that's attached to my headset. Songwriter. Singer-songwriter Casey beat Brian McFadden and Damien Rice. Portrayal. Last year actor Shane Ritchie won an award for his portrayal of Alfie Moon in EastEnders. Solo. Osborne appears more than any other act, with 2 solo records featured. Trap. No Ireland team lining up to play England will ever fall into that trap, he said. Angel. Angels. Best song? Brush. The defending champion brushed aside the Czech qualifier 7-5-6-0. Gallery. The plain green Norway spruce is displayed in the gallery's foyer. Fuss. Campbell. Email Rosili Fuss. Planet. It seems unlikely that we will end up living in a planet where every human is a blogger. Fancy. He just fancies a challenge. Privilege. Bob was one of the most mesmeric people I've ever had the privilege to work with. Nostalgia. Roundabout continues nostalgia trip. Judicial. But judicial reviews into 5 other deaths in southern Iraq were ruled out. Marginal. Mr. Cable said 40% of all pensioners were now paying marginal tax rates of 50%. Compatible. A pity Tandy did not make it DOS compatible. Grid. Computer grid to help the world. Muscle. Microsoft is just one of the net giants muscling in on search. Attach. I have a little microphone that's attached to my headset. Till. Christmas shoppers flock to Tills. Phenomenal. It was out of my range, and obviously Gavin is phenomenal when it comes to distance. Visible. It dries and is not visible under normal light. Absorb. It creates a cloud of electrons sitting in the silicon and that absorbs all the light, he said. Qualified. Corinthians have not qualified. Prejudice. The Lib Dems warned both parties against pandering to prejudice. Embarrassing. It's got embarrassing to be honest. Cement. Swiss cement firm in buying spree. Defy. Asia shares defy post-quake gloom. Briefing. A Lesotho government news briefing is expected on Wednesday. Circulation. Also up this year was the amount of spam in circulation. Real. I'm still reeling. Clue. I didn't have a clue. Seti Dowu. Excessive. OPEC closely watches global stocks to ensure that there is not an excessive supply in the market. Outweigh. The costs could easily outweigh the benefits. Instrument. It also doubles up as an electronic musical instrument. Audit. The government now intends to carry out an audit of payrolls at all other government ministries. Eliminate. The whole purpose of democratic government is to eliminate poverty. Disrupt. Long-haul travelers were not disrupted. Object. Similarly, with art, browsing is often more important than finding a particular object. Reservation. Canada, a key gold producer, also expressed reservations. Promising. However, the first 7 weeks of this year had produced promising signs. Wimpy said. Lag. Gamers tend to migrate toward networks with the lowest lag. Expenditure. Current government expenditure should come from tax revenues, Mr. Khatami said. Rental. Video rental stores may also have to watch their back. Spotlight. Sport betting rules in Spotlight. Idle. Venezuela identifies idle farms. Ranch. Mr. Underwood also lets people come in person to the ranch to hunt and shoot game animals. Trace. It's very difficult, there are many displaced, stated Joaquim Sahundi, head of tracing in Wombo. Stimulate. Economist Colin Garrow said the budget looked as if it would stimulate economic growth. Email. For the record, first 3 sentences of email spot on. Assumption. They have arrived at their own interpretations and assumptions with regards their actions. Cigarette. China has 350 million smokers who consume 1.7 trillion cigarettes a year. Flourish. How the Academy Awards flourished. Blend. The way this young team are blending. The glory days are on their way back. Prolong. In eastern and southern Ethiopia, a prolonged drought has killed crops and drained wells. Convenient. They just move the activity into the mobile phone as it's a much more convenient way to do it. Gamble. Tigers wary of Farrell Gamble. Bag. Tate and Lyle Boss Bag's top award. Dimension. Mobile audio enters new dimension. Thrive. I thrive on it and think it makes me perform better, he said. Treaty. But he played down reports Mr. Blair was considering a new US-friendly treaty. Recommendation. The proposals follow a recommendation last year by elections watchdog the Electoral Commission. Seoul. It has a battery, processor, and motor embedded in the Seoul. Hijack. Getting the machines hijacked was worryingly easy. Comprise. Cell is comprised of several computing engines, or cores. Outfit. Yahoo, Ask Jeeves, Amazon and a handful of smaller outfits are all seeking to capture eyeballs. Bizarre. It is a bizarre analogy. Orchestra. The orchestra strikes up more than 110 times during the average Oscars show. Interpretation. The referee's interpretation was that Grukok was attempting to step over the rock. Universal. Christian Andersen's fairy tales are timeless and universal, said Shar. Streak. McIlroy continues winning streak. Umbrella. The Arts Council of Wales may be among the next to come under the Assembly government's umbrella. Strictly. In future, I'm going to regulate my time far more strictly. Congratulate. I congratulate my players. Ridiculous. The way I'm playing is ridiculous. Overwhelm. We've all been overwhelmed by the response and can't get it in perspective yet. Anonymous. The site can also be seen using anonymous proxy services that are based in the US. Nonsense. Nonsense. Animosity. Mr. Peston said the pair had mutual animosity and contempt. Extremist. Hazel Blears said innocent Muslims would be targeted because of the search for Islamic extremists. Incompatible. The law lord said the measures were incompatible with European human rights laws. Mode. O'Sullivan's career is now in vertical takeoff mode. Fingerprint. Net fingerprints combat attacks. Rifle. Remote control rifle range debuts. Vastly. He is vastly experienced and has a calming influence on all around him. Alien. Human foes are rendered just as well as alien ones. Invisible. A lot of the process will be invisible. Convincing. It should have been more convincing, said McLaren. Textbook. In China they spend $17 per child per year on textbooks. Frequency. Semiconductor lasers made before now have only produced light in a narrow frequency ranges. Pixel. British TV pictures are made up of 625 lines and about 700 pixels. Cab. Cabs collect mountain of mobiles. Tender. According to Mr. Waller, Exxon were not planning to bid at a new tender anyway. Appetite. The two key factors in whetting people's appetite were falling prices and a huge marketing push. Falter. Election deal faltered over Heathrow. Primarily. Munich Re, the world's biggest reinsurer, said, "This is primarily a human tragedy." Stockpile. Heavy stockpiles could help force prices lower when demand eases. Booming. There is also growing evidence that the previously booming UK housing market is now cooling. Teens know little of politics. Obscure. I understand why, but I think there is a much bigger message here that has been obscured. Defect. Conservative MP defects to Labour. Preference. Many people use it in preference to the phone or arrange to meet up with friends at net cafes. Relocate. As they try to go back home, others are trying to relocate their relatives. Plague. Now that I am holding a job, I avoid online RPGs like the plague. Rhythm. My body has to get accustomed again to the stress. The rhythm. Cooperation. EU cooperation would help get better UK immigration controls, he argued. Monetary. The bank said successful monetary policy depends on having good information. Calculator. Or a pocket calculator? Excuse. People who are thinking of switching will have no more excuses, he said. Transparency. It's all about transparency, he said. Or costs hit global steel firms. Exceptional. The LTA has always done an exceptional job of ensuring that. Solely. Unusually for this kind of film, the extras don't solely concentrate on the special effects. Hall. Long-haul travelers were not disrupted. Judiciary. He is also head of the Judiciary and a member of the Cabinet as Constitutional Affairs Secretary. Participant. Participants will text selected words which will impact how the characters in the drama interact. Stall. Profits stall at China's Lenovo. Imply. Law lords were simply wrong to imply the men were being held arbitrarily. Harsh. It was too harsh, Collins told Radio 5 Live. Gesture. Although his gestures were part of the rap culture, they had gone beyond what is expected. Compact. Response supplies maps to aid groups via the web, and on compact disc steadily. Turkey's economy has steadily recovered from a severe crisis in 2001. Prohibit. He was charged under a law which prohibits indecent dress or expression. Valid. The High Court last month ruled the act was valid and the proposed hunting ban was lawful. Conclusion. Frederick Forsyth's rhetoric is absurd and his conclusions laughable. Genius. U.S. bank boss hails Genius Smith. Button. I was left with no option but to press the pause button vis-a-vis the act, he said. Payroll. The gain in non-farm payrolls was below market expectations of 190,000 new jobs. Sale. Siemens sale into biometric future. Trademark. Orange said it was starting proceedings against the eSIM-mobile service for trademark infringement. Emission. Several jurisdictions, notably the state of California, mandate low emissions for new cars. Essentially, the technology allows for much more personalized TV. Mill. The mill, Krivoristal, is one of the world's most profitable. Frustrate. Kerr frustrated at victory margin. Rover. Rovers reject third Ferguson bid. Signature. Mr. Flight's supporters also say they have the 50 signatures needed to trigger the EGM. Cheese. Feta cheese battle reaches court. Absent. Saint Andre anger at absent stars. Eager. He has not played regular football this year but is eager to impress in the Premiership. Complicated. It really is no more complicated than that. Clutch. Its best-known brand is Foster's Lager, though it makes a clutch of beer brands and spirits. Fortunately, it doesn't merely live up to its promise, but exceeds it. Grasp. The scale, the speed, the ferocity of what happened on Boxing Day is difficult to grasp. Compelling. The problem then becomes one of making the product compelling enough. Verdict. But the IAAF said it was very surprised by the verdict. Ruth. Another superb game as Nadal breaks to once again lift the Ruth mechanism. But this particular mechanism does not work for the United States. Stir. Bond game fails to shake or stir. Provoke. Her links to Opus Dei, which means work of God in Latin, have provoked controversy. Urgent. It is urgent that we do so. Demographic. 40% fall in the key 16 to 35-year-old demographic. Installation. Currently, graphics-intensive PC games also require multiple disks for installation. Scenario. The scenarios are well scripted and you regularly get hints from the Fatal Force commanders. Limp. Everton's problems worsened when James McFadden limped off with an injury. Neat. I'd hate to think I belonged to any neat marketing niche, because that's all it is. Comprehensive. A comprehensive ban on smoking in all enclosed public places in Scotland. Loop. The vital local loop is the crucial link between telephone exchanges and homes. Genocide. An estimated 25,000 girls and women were raped during the 1994 genocide. Critically. She also starred as the lead role in critically acclaimed film Dirty Pretty Things in 2002. Ashamed. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I gave it my all. Superhero. Lead to create new film superhero. Tally. And Brown now looks certain to add to his tally of 7 senior appearances for England. Envelope. Hundreds of documents and unsealed envelopes were scattered all over the table. Phrase. In England you have a good phrase. Euthanasia. MPs to debate euthanasia laws. Infamous. Worse was to follow, though, as an infamous newspaper sting cost him his treasured England captaincy. Flair. The dependable Jan Delaide keeps the number 10 jersey, despite clamours for the flair of Michalak. Radically. Lee gave the artists responsible for the comic designs credits for their work. Ancient. It would also have torn up ancient legislation banning heirs to the throne marrying Roman Catholics. Creativity. It's all about new ideas and creativity. Certificate. The film has already been cleared by the censor board with an A. Adults only certificate. Quest. It's not so much quests, but it has the adrenaline of a real-life situation, goals to achieve, etc. Serial. Serial truants make up 1 in 13 pupils. Evict. Stallone evicted from Big Brother. Jacket. Sir Paul, however, did nothing more racy than remove his jacket as he sang. Spectrum. The analog spectrum for the old phones has been retired. Divorce. Few realize that Westminster in effect has its own divorce den. Bow. Hambo's out for US. Entertaining. It is entertaining. Goals are scored and teams are always trying to win. Weird. It is a weird technology. Rattle. Italy aim to rattle England. Rotate. The other major child parts will also be rotated between young actors. Inspector. IAEA inspectors make around 3,000 visits a year to more than 900 nuclear facilities worldwide. Loom. Final hunts held as ban looms. Decisive. Kerr applauded the decisive move which earned the victory. Cord. The Spaniard wins the game courtesy of another lucky net cord. Vaccine. UK pledges £1 billion to vaccine effort. Shipment. Shipments of consumer electronics rose by almost 11% between 2003 and 2004. Mobility. It's all about trying to get mobility in my back. Interaction. All three men said that the social interaction of mobile music would drive the market. Architecture. Current PC architecture is nearing its limits. Navigation. Completely revolutionized navigation for boats and was in use for centuries. Relentless. Junk emails on relentless rise. Goodwill. Sadly, the outpouring of goodwill has also encouraged some conmen to try to cash in. Devastating. She added, it would be a momentous change and devastating to the arts. Hunger. Russian ex-spy on hunger strike. Fraudulent. The companies insist they were the victims of fraudulent bookkeeping. Brink. Argentina was on the brink of collapse. Innocence. He has firmly declared his innocence. Livelihood. Many people will have had their livelihoods, their whole future destroyed in a few seconds. Fetch. Hendrix guitar fetches £100,000. Beef. 50s beef is 50s beef and I really don't know where all this stems from. Panic. He said Britain was in danger of needless panic over public safety issues. Render. Human foes are rendered just as well as alien ones. Lease. Commodore finds new lease of life. Magnitude. This gives it processing power an order of magnitude above its competitors. Dive. It was fault after fault. Dive after dive. Constructive. Here's a guy in jail, making constructive use of his time instead of withering away, he said. Calendar. Now in its third year, Bangkok is a relatively recent addition to the hectic film festival calendar. Execute. I had a good game plan and I executed it perfectly, he said. Applicant. Applicants will be tested in their home country. Unleash. About 50,000 new products will be unleashed at the Tech Fest, which is the largest yet. Flexible. Cash gives way to flexible friend. Occasionally. Today's computer networks are large, complex and occasionally fragile. Clarity. Doctors are saying they want more clarity. Supermarket. Ahold is the world's fourth largest supermarket chain. Dependent. The effect was to leave the economy more dependent than ever on exports for its recent recovery. Suspicious. We've seen absolutely no suspicious betting patterns. Rough. I've got the rough idea, but this is the most intimidating project of my career. Wary. Tigers wary of foul gamble. Deteriorate. Early results show that response times of some sites have deteriorated by up to 85%. Scary. Pretty scary implications if you think about it. Confidentiality. The value of the deal has not been revealed, because of a confidentiality clause in the agreement. Breakdown. Commer's computer breakdown plunged its flight crew scheduling system into disarray. Aftermath. They wanted to blog the tsunami and its aftermath. Deliberate. However, union officials denied there had been a deliberate sickout. Productive. Oil revenues should be used for productive investment. Successor. Nissan names successor to Gasan. Motor. It has a battery, processor, and motor embedded in the sole. Deploy. Cell is, in fact, specifically designed to be deployed throughout the house. Boundary. Microsoft will adopt open standards allowing music to cross boundaries for the first time. Buoy. Hit games like Halo 2, which was released in November, helped to buoy the sales figures. Deter. The prices were steep by a lot of people's standards, but Evans said it was not deterring shoppers. Insight. Judges said the film tackled the contentious subject with great insight and sensitivity. Revolutionary. But will the device prove to be as revolutionary as claimed? Unprecedented. That's unprecedented, said Mr. Hogan. Dampen. But camera phone fears have not dampened the manufacturer's profits. Aggressively. He added that Labour also aggressively fought all forms of racism. Accountability. The accountability should be in the Northeast as well. Deadly. 3 years after Argentina was hit by a deadly economic crisis, there is fresh hope. Bitter. It is just more bitter and personal against United, the defender told the Guardian newspaper. Intensive. Homes will now have intensive treatment in South Africa. Statutory. In Albania particularly there is no statutory child care or protection structure. Outlaw. Johnny Depp, the acting outlaw. Conceal. The bank had been accused of illegally concealing Jean Pinochet's assets. Considerable. He arrived at the Vasco da Gama club with considerable prestige which he failed to live up to. Shocked. I am shocked and surprised by their decision. Supreme. You've got to hand it to Kilroy Silk for his sheer arrogance and supreme self-belief. Reflection. That's not a reflection on Robinson personally. Foreigner. The state wanted to control Gazprom before allowing foreigners to trade. Grade. India's foreign currency rating is now one notch below investment grade, which starts at BBB. Evaluate. We are still evaluating it. Clarify. I shall make a further statement on Monday, clarifying our position. Downside. But the real downside is the hassle of getting the game to run. Stock. Tory stalking horse Meyer dies. Tick. The ticking budget facing the U.S. Protein. Its main drug, desmoteplase, is based on a protein in the bat's saliva. Volunteer. The campaign set itself a target of recruiting 2,500 volunteers. Inner. Music made in the inner cities? Toilet. A bandmate informed the crowd Skinner was in the toilet. Coin. From that point, the 1 million lira note will become the new 1 lira coin. Humble. Southampton were last humbled by a club from the third tier 6 years ago. Reliable. The gameplay is reliable. Bog standard stuff. Short on originality. Misery. We are deeply concerned that the new year will spell misery for huge numbers of garment workers. Motive. The pirates with no profit motive. Propaganda. Labour's EU propaganda. Doom. The name will doom it. Crazy. It's crazy. I think it's bigger than the Academy Awards. Entertain. Carrie entertained crowds at the UK premiere of Lemony Snicket in London on Friday. Playwright Perry, 34, is one of America's best-known black playwrights but is a newcomer to film. Credible. Mr. Conte is simply not credible. Sensational. He called the film pornographic and sensational. Goodbye, Tevez. Then, can kiss tranquility goodbye. Forge. He has since forged a successful solo career, scoring 9 UK top 30 singles since 1998. Nightclub. Before that it had been used as a nightclub for 10 years. Spawn. His Marvel Universe spawned the new title of Marvel Comics. Quartet. GB Quartet get cross-country call. Nightmare. It's true that I was a nightmare. Impossible. Reign. Wenger has won the title and the FA Cup 3 times each during his reign. Literary. The winner gets a deal with literary agency Curtis Brown. Decorate. Desai is one of the most decorated players in the history of football. Plain. Spammers are criminals. Plain and simple. Unite. TV show unites Angolan families. Pornographic. He called the film pornographic and sensational. Whatsoever. I've absolutely no doubt whatsoever this is heartfelt. Comfortably. I played him at the US Open and won quite comfortably then. Ladder. And he promised help to get young people on the property ladder. Simulate. It is dedicated to climate modeling and simulating seismic activity. Grave. If it were planned it would be a very grave matter indeed. Inaccurate. They're invariably inaccurate. Uncomfortable, and cumbersome to use. Authentic. It is the authentic and shocking voice of the Conservative Party. Fracture. I'd fractured my big toe as well, which was on the break. Flee. And only asylum seekers genuinely fleeing death or persecution would be admitted. Collective. They are largely collective days of rest. Suffering. The motive has got to be to end suffering. Joy. Beneath joy as Reds take control. Nurse. What are the contemporary issue in nurses? Courage. Orkara's kicking was off but he showed great courage in defense. Precise. But the Tories insisted they would hold ministers to account over the precise purpose of the scheme. Inheritance. We are leaving a poor inheritance for the future generations. Precious. Your identity is one of the most precious commodities. Migration. We want more migration. More people come to study and to work. Precedent. Many discussion groups have said that it set a dangerous precedent and could incite vigilantism. Inspection. What we need is the equivalent of a thorough Ofsted inspection of the government's accounts. Breed. This combined are breeding grounds of extremism and terrorism. Provisional. He said the provisional figures on the dead and lost had been provided by the police. Finger. Every arm of government seems to have had a finger in the pie. Fortunately, it doesn't merely live up to its promise, but exceeds it. Silly. We took silly precautions. Literacy. More to do on adult literacy. Obsession. Let us be clear, such obsession is rare. Puzzle. Lucy puzzle over disallowed try. Relish. Perry relishes Anfield challenge. Bruise. Murphy. That was a bruising battle. Remotely. Wales have some way to go before they can be remotely considered in a similar light. Polish. But Roddick comes up with 2 big serves to polish off the game. Manually. Either PCs detect updates automatically or users manually download fixes through Microsoft's site. Pulse. The hardware works in pairs and beam data through the air in the form of laser pulses. Concrete. This is a concrete example of how the union benefits people's daily lives, he added. Adjustment. We did not disclose these adjustments, he said. Cosmetic. This kind of cosmetic exercise does not persuade anybody. Bin. Grewcock was sin-binned with Wales captain Gareth Thomas for retaliation. Diet. Cactus diet deal for Fitafarm. Desert. You don't expect this in the desert. Supposedly. Den's death came 16 years after he was supposedly shot in 1989. Demise. Dirty Den's demise seen by 14 meters. Charm. Animation charms Japan box office. Inevitably they insist there is no need to raise taxes to fund improvements in services. Overrule. Business sense probably tends to overrule everything else. Furniture. Home furnishings and furniture stores also performed well, rising 2.2%. Dealer. Both were drug dealers and were shot before turning to music. Bottle. You have just got to think for a minute. Is it too early to open a bottle? Exception. But there are exceptions. Reliance. Reliance shares added 1.7%, while Reliance Energy, headed by Anil, jumped 7%. Confirmation. Subject to our doctor's confirmation, we have decided to clear Massey, added Kiplagat. Retreat. This announcement is a further humiliating retreat by the government. Hurricane. Unlike the hurricanes, you can't just run a model. Partisan. Graham Barlow, editor of Mac Format, understandably has a rather partisan viewpoint. Depress. However, commercial piracy and illegal file sharing are continuing to depress our markets. Humanitarian. Humanitarian groups in Darfur have been making good use of response maps. Scream. The crowd screamed when he arrived on the red carpet. Wane. The report comes at a time when Europe's competitive position is waning. Rage. The debate will rage on, and I'm not sure there is a satisfactory solution. Relaxed. Pioplosoft had an easygoing, relaxed atmosphere. Uniquely. Heavy traffic and the layout under the ground mean that digging is uniquely difficult, he said. Accuracy. Gronefeld was the more powerful player but could not match her opponent's relentless accuracy. Stifle. Mr. Adink blames the euro for stifling demand. Underpin. Newest EU members underpin growth. Mixture. Now there is a handful to look back with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Steering. Fiat chief takes steering wheel. Fragile. Today's computer networks are large, complex and occasionally fragile. Deaf. Video phone help for deaf people. Moratorium. Germany also proposed a freeze and Canada has begun its own moratorium. Remittance. This money, known as remittances, can amount to as much as $1 billion a year. Tooth. We will fight tooth and nail to stop him whatever his offer says. Independence. It is symbolic of our independence from the old colonial ways. Den. Few realize that Westminster in effect has its own divorce den. Hostility. But he experienced hostility from Unionists, some of whom dubbed him Minister of Discord. Informal. Extending in court conciliation, more informal hearings before contested court cases. Relax. We are in touch with England and they are relaxed about it. Underestimate. You cannot underestimate the impact of the war in Iraq. Coastal. China's problem is it has immediate demand and they needed the oil for their coastal refineries. Refinery. China's problem is it has immediate demand and they needed the oil for their coastal refineries. Ditch. Analysts reckon that other nations may follow suit and now ditch the dollar. Mogul. Music mogul Fuller sells company. Fruit. These tough measures have borne fruit. Credential. Ruddock backs Yap's credentials. Dynamic. He said that the DUP leader and preacher was a very dynamic, extraordinary figure. Interrupt. There are no cutscenes to interrupt the flow. Dislike. I've always disliked angels intensely. Rehabilitation. Have 1 year's drug rehabilitation. Stumble. I've not just stumbled upon this. Cripple. Shutting down sites that listed trackers crippled the BitTorrent network. Petition. 91 MPs have signed a petition backing the amendment. Tier. Southampton were last humbled by a club from the third tier 6 years ago. Break. I'd fractured my big toe as well, which was on the break. Layout. Heavy traffic and the layout under the ground mean that digging is uniquely difficult. he said. Steam. Broadband steams ahead in the US. Bully. Greer attacks bully Big Brother. Snub. Consumers snub portable video. Boil. Roddick has gone off the boil and again struggles. Toy. The Robosapiens toy is almost impossible to find in online and offline stores. Mere. But will mobiles become mere storage devices? Assemble. His team assembled wherever his gigs were. Lean. Lord Goldsmith also denied them, saying he was not leaned on in any way. Commuter. High-tech posters guide commuters. Promoter. And it is believed promoters will make stars agree not to perform such tunes on stage. Allegiance. Finally, blind allegiance to a balanced budget will have to be abandoned. Personnel. We must get out of it through the efforts of current personnel, said Thompson. Pervasive. Spam is one of the most aggravating and pervasive problems facing consumers today. Frantic. But a more frantic shooter you will not find at the end of your joypad this year. Refund. Anyone who cannot make the concert will be given a refund. Accountable. It said member states needed to be more accountable on how money was spent. Embassy. UK set to cut back on embassies.